On a cold October night in 1932, one of history's most thrilling chases took place on the choppy waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Captain Jack Lightning Murphy was one of the most famous rum runners of the Prohibition era. With his fast boat and daring maneuvers, he had outsmarted the Coast Guard multiple times. But how long would Murphy's luck last this night? What happened during the United States Coast Guard's biggest operation, and how did this sea battle come to an end?
I am Captain Jack Murphy. People call me Lightning because I'm lightning fast on the seas. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 10 years, I've made a name for myself as the best rum runner along the Atlantic coast. That night I'll never forget, the night of October 15th, 1932. I lived through the greatest adventure of my life. About 40 miles off the Boston coast, we were gliding silently over the dark waters. My boat Sea Ghost was a beauty, specially designed, 35 feet long, with 2 powerful Liberty engines and secret compartments. This boat was my life. Tonight I had only 2 men in my crew, Vincent Vinny Torrino, my most trusted man, and Billy Kowalski, a young but brave guy from Chicago. Vinny came up to me, keeping his voice low as he spoke. 25 years old, an Italian-American, Vinny knew boats as well as I did. He constantly listened to the sounds of our engines. He could detect even the slightest abnormality. As night approached the United States coastline, moonlight scattered silver sparkles across the ocean's surface. The wind was blowing gently, and the waves were tenderly touching the bow of our boat. 15 cases of Scottish whiskey and 10 cases of Irish rum we'd gotten from Canadian suppliers sat safely in the boat's secret compartments. Each case was worth its weight in gold in New York's speakeasy bars. Vinny's worried expression was visible in the moonlight. We knew Coast Guard activity had increased in recent weeks. President Hoover's decision to strictly enforce prohibition had made our job harder. But I'd been doing this for 10 years. I could handle any situation. Billy was keeping watch on deck. This 20-year-old, blonde-haired, blue-eyed young man came from the streets of Chicago. Billy, whose family were Irish immigrants, had gotten into this dangerous business to make money. He was working for his mother and little sister. It was 11 o'clock at night when I saw Billy signaling. In the distance, to the southeast, small points of light appeared. My heart rate quickened. It could be a Coast Guard ship, but I wasn't sure. I took out my binoculars and looked carefully. USS Tampa, one of the Coast Guard's fastest ships, 150 feet long, with powerful engines. This ship was designed to catch us. Spotlights were flashing on and off on its deck, and it was clearly heading in our direction. Vinny looked at me as he started the engine. There was worry in his eyes, but also confidence. This was our 5th major chase. We'd successfully escaped the previous 4. The roar of our engines tore through the night. Sea Ghost began to practically fly across the water's surface. We reached 35 knots and pulled away from the Coast Guard ship. But I knew Tampa was fast too. It wouldn't stay far behind us. The wind was whipping my face. Seawater was splashing into the boat from the sides. Billy was holding tight to the deck, a mixture of excitement and fear on his young face. Vinny was listening to the engine sounds, making adjustments to get the best performance. Powerful spotlights from Tampa were searching for us. These lights moved like giant fingers in the darkness of night, trying to catch us. I steered Sea Ghost in zigzag patterns. This would make it harder for them to take aim. The chase lasted a full hour. A breathtaking race was taking place between 2 ships on the cold waters of the Atlantic. Tampa's sirens were screaming, ordering us to stop, but I wasn't even thinking about stopping. Vinny warned me that we shouldn't overload the engines. Our engines could overheat, and then we'd be completely helpless. But I had no other choice. Getting caught meant federal prison. As we approached the Long Island coast, the sea became even choppier. Large waves were lifting Sea Ghost into the air, then bringing it down hard onto the water. With each wave jump, the boat's skeleton creaked, making sounds as if it would break apart. Billy's face was pale. but his determination was visible. This young man, who had grown up in Chicago's tough streets, had learned to face difficulties. He thought the money he'd earned from this job was worth the risk, considering he could send it to his family. Tampa was only 200 meters behind us now. I could hear the Coast Guard officers shouting. This team, commanded by Lieutenant Thomas Richardson, looked determined. Richardson, who had made a name for himself as a young Harvard graduate officer, had been successful in prohibition operations. Just then, a brilliant idea came to me. Near Fire Island, there were shallow waters. Big ships couldn't go there, but it wouldn't be a problem for a small boat like Seaghost. This was my only chance. When Vinny understood my plan, his eyes widened. Going into shallow waters was a big risk. We could hit rocks, the boat could sink. But it was better than getting caught. I turned toward the north coast of Fire Island. Water depth was rapidly decreasing. Seaghost's draft was just over 3 feet. This was our advantage. Tampa's draft was much greater. The Coast Guard ship was hesitant to enter shallow waters. Richardson and his team had to find a different way to prevent our escape. The spotlights were still following us, but the distance was opening up. As we passed through the shallow waters, I felt the harsh touch of rocks beneath Seaghost. The boat swayed slightly, but wasn't damaged. Vinny had slowed the engines, allowing me to proceed carefully. While Billy was trying to keep his balance on deck, he pointed to the lights on the Long Island shore. There, cars were waiting for us in small coves. The whiskeys and rums from Istanbul would be delivered to New York's wealthy customers. But Tampa hadn't given up. Richardson was trying to surround us by following a different route. The Coast Guard's new strategy was to catch us before we could reach shore. Toward morning, fatigue began to settle into our bones. After 3 hours of chase, Seaghost's engines were also straining. Vinny was constantly checking engine temperature, worried about the cooling system. On the west coast of Montauk Point, there was a small cove. It was considered a safe harbor, frequently used by smugglers. Local fishermen also sheltered there, and the Coast Guard usually didn't come that far. When I entered the cove, the first lights of dawn were beginning to appear on the horizon. Vinny and Billy began unloading the cargo. Each case was carefully carried to shore and loaded onto waiting trucks. But just then, I saw Tampa's silhouette at the entrance of the cove. Richardson and his team had found us. The Coast Guard ship was slowly entering the cove, and our escape route was closing. Billy looked at me in panic, but I kept my calm. 10 years of experience had taught me how to handle such situations. I still had a chance. On the other side of the cove, there was a narrow passage between the rocks. Only very small boats could pass through there. Seaghost was designed exactly for this job. While Vinny was loading the last case onto the truck, I steered the boat toward the narrow passage between the rocks. Tampa's spotlights had found us, but it was too late now. When we emerged from the narrow passage, the open sea was before us again. The Coast Guard ship couldn't pass between the rocks. It was too big. But I knew Richardson wouldn't give up. He would call other Coast Guard boats. At 6 in the morning, we reached the New London coast. There, I had hidden Seaghost in a safe harbor. Vinny and Billy were tired but happy. We had managed to escape from the Coast Guard once again. But this game wouldn't last long. There were rumors that the end of Prohibition was approaching. With Roosevelt's election, there was talk that the alcohol ban might be lifted. Then, the work of rum runners like us would be finished. Vinny was thinking about his family in Brooklyn. He had grown up in Italian neighborhoods, struggling with harsh living conditions. With the money he earned from this job, he could build a better life for his family. Billy was dreaming of the day he would return to Chicago. The money he had saved for his mother and sister would offer them a better future. His family, who were Irish immigrants, were struggling with difficult living conditions in the United States. As for me, I was thinking about my freedom on the seas, that unique feeling I had on Seaghost's deck, facing the endless blue of the Atlantic. This was a value that couldn't be bought with any money. My family, who had immigrated from Ireland's Green Hills to the United States, had bequeathed me their love of seamanship. My grandfather Patrick Murphy used to fish off the Irish coast. I had grown up listening to his stories. In New London Harbor, I lit a cigarette in the cold morning air. As I watched the smoke rise in the air, I thought about the night we had left behind. Richardson's determined face wouldn't leave my mind. I knew he wouldn't give up chasing us. While Vinny was doing engine checks, he heard a sound that worried me. One of the engine's cooling system had overworked, and metal parts had expanded. We needed this repaired. Seaghost had to be in perfect condition for the next operation. Billy had noticed the smell of coffee coming from the shore. A nearby fisherman's diner had opened early and brewed fresh coffee. After the long night, hot coffee would be like heaven for us. In this young man's eyes, I could see the traces of his childhood spent on Chicago streets. His father had been injured while working in steel factories, and the responsibility of supporting the family had fallen on Billy's shoulders. Vinny was checking under the boat, examining the damage we had taken on the rocks. There were small scratches on Seaghost's hull, but no structural damage. I had built this boat with my own hands. Every screw, every plank had been carefully chosen. With materials I got from Brooklyn shipyards, I had brought her to life by working nights. That night's chase wasn't just a struggle between the Coast Guard and smugglers. In the final years of the United States Prohibition era, it was the war between freedom and prohibition. Both sides were fighting for the values they believed in. Lieutenant Richardson and the Coast Guard team were doing their duty to enforce the laws and maintain order. We smugglers were struggling to provide what people wanted and protect our own freedom. From Tampa's deck, Richardson was probably sending messages to Washington to report our escape. Coast Guard prohibition operations were becoming increasingly strict, using more advanced methods to catch smugglers. Radio systems had improved, coordination between ships had increased. It was no longer as easy to operate alone as it used to be. In the silence of the harbor, seagulls' cries could be heard. These sounds took me back to my childhood, reminding me of days spent on the Boston coast. Back then, my father also worked as a sailor and taught me the dance of sails in the wind. Now I was playing dangerous games with illegal cargo on the same waters.
Captain Jack Murphy's unforgettable night is a vivid example of the maritime struggle during the Prohibition era. This cat-and-mouse game played on the United States coastline symbolized not only the illegal liquor trade, but also the conflict between freedom and control. Murphy and thousands of rum runners risked their lives on the choppy waters of the Atlantic both to make money and to rebel against the system. The Coast Guard, on the other hand, tried to enforce the laws by doing their duty. This story presents us with unforgettable memories from one of the most colorful periods in American history.